Anger is often perceived as a reaction to something that happens to us. We're taught that when someone does something that we don't like or agrees with us, we're justified in being angry. But what if I told you that anger is not a reaction at all? What if anger is, in fact, a choice? Most people go through life thinking that their anger is a response to external factors. When someone cuts you off in traffic, or when a coworker undermines you in front of others, the natural inclination is to get angry. It feels almost involuntary, like the emotion just takes over your body. But here's the truth. Anger is a decision you make, not something forced upon you. You see, emotions are powerful, but they are also malleable. You can train yourself to respond differently, to choose a different emotional reaction when something triggers you. It's not easy, and it's not something that happens overnight, but it's a choice nonetheless. The moment you realize this, the whole dynamic of your emotional life begins to shift. Let's break this down. When you feel angry, you're essentially saying to yourself, this situation is out of my control, and I don't like it. That feeling of powerlessness often fuels the anger, but instead of reacting with irritation or frustration, you could stop for a moment and ask yourself a different question. What part of this situation can I control? The very act of taking control of your response is empowering. Consider the moment when you feel that spark of anger igniting. Often it's not the action itself that stirs up the emotion, but how we perceive it. Someone might say something that rubs us the wrong way, or a situation may unfold that seems unfair. In that moment, your immediate reaction is to feel agitated. But what if you chose not to give that situation power over your emotions? What if, in that moment, you could look at it objectively, without letting the anger cloud your judgment? This shift in perspective doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or pretending that something didn't bother you. It means taking a step back and acknowledging that your emotional response is within your control. You don't have to let your emotions take over you. You have the power to decide how you react, and the longer you practice this mindset, the more natural it will become. Let's explore how this works in practice. Think about a situation where you would typically get angry. Maybe a friend cancels plans at the last minute, or you're stuck waiting in a long line at a store. Your usual response might be irritation or frustration, but if you take a moment and reframe the situation, it becomes clear that your anger is not a natural or necessary reaction. The canceled plans don't change anything about your day. The line at the store doesn't affect your worth as a person. In both situations, the only thing truly being hurt is your perception of the event. By recognizing that your anger is a choice, you begin to understand that it doesn't have to be the default response. Instead of feeling justified in your anger, you begin to see it as an unnecessary expenditure of energy. You don't need to give that energy away to something that doesn't deserve it. The power of choice also extends to how we interact with others. Often, we allow other people's behavior to dictate our emotional state. Someone says something rude, and we immediately feel hurt or angry. But when you recognize that anger is a choice, you can decide to let it roll off you. The rude comment is theirs to carry, not yours. You don't have to let it define your emotional state. The more you practice this, the more you'll realize that anger is often a knee-jerk reaction, something we've been conditioned to do without thinking. Once you realize this, you can start catching yourself before it takes hold. The key is awareness, the ability to recognize when you're about to react and to step back and choose a different path. This isn't about suppressing your emotions, but about recognizing that you have the power to shape them. The next time you feel anger rising up, ask yourself, what would happen if I chose not to react? What if I let go of the need to be angry and instead focused on maintaining my peace of mind? The more you practice this shift in perspective, the more natural it will become, and eventually you'll find that anger simply doesn't have the same hold over you anymore. It may take time, but the freedom to choose how you respond to the world is yours to claim. We live in a world that constantly pushes us to focus on external circumstances. The media, our friends, our families, and even our own inner voices tell us that how we feel is a direct result of what happens around us. If someone insults you, you get angry. If something doesn't go your way, you feel frustrated. We're taught that we don't have control over the way we feel, but the truth is, we are in control of our emotions, even in the most challenging situations. You can't always control what others do or say, but you can control how you respond to it. At the core of this understanding is the realization that your emotional state is not dependent on someone else's actions. It's easy to think that if someone does something that offends us, they are the ones causing our anger or frustration. But when we place the blame on another person, we give away our power. We let their actions dictate how we feel. In truth, it is our response to their actions that causes our emotional reactions. Think about a time when someone said something that hurt you, or when someone did something that made you upset. It's easy to point fingers at them to say, they made me feel this way. But if you really examine it, you'll see that no one can force you to feel anything without your consent. It's not their words or actions that trigger your anger, it's how you perceive and react to those words or actions. What if, in those moments, you could choose a different reaction? What if, instead of feeling offended or angry, you could step back and decide to respond from a place of understanding or calmness? This shift in mindset is crucial. Once you begin to recognize that your emotions are within your control, you gain a tremendous sense of power. Instead of feeling like a victim to other people's behavior, you realize that your emotions are yours to navigate. This doesn't mean that you suppress your feelings or ignore your natural responses. Rather, it means that you take responsibility for them. You acknowledge that your feelings are yours to manage, and you stop blaming others for how you feel. It's also important to recognize that emotional control doesn't mean repressing emotions. You don't need to bottle up your anger or frustration. You just need to acknowledge that you have the choice of how to deal with those emotions. For example, instead of lashing out in anger, you might decide to take a step back and give yourself some space to cool down. Instead of holding onto a grudge or ruminating over someone's rude comment, you might choose to let it go. These choices may not always be easy, but they are always within your reach. In practice, this means stepping out of automatic reactions. Most of us are conditioned to react emotionally without thinking. It's almost like a reflex. Someone cuts us off in traffic and we automatically get angry. A colleague says something snide and we immediately feel hurt. But the key is breaking that automatic cycle. When you realize that you can control your response, you can stop the knee-jerk reaction and choose how you want to feel. It's also about realizing that not everything is as personal as we make it out to be. We tend to internalize others' behavior, believing that it's directed at us. But in reality, people's actions are often a reflection of their own emotions, insecurities, and experiences. When someone insults you or disrespects you, it's not necessarily a personal attack. More often than not, it's a reflection of what they're going through or how they view the world. Understanding this helps you detach from their actions and see them for what they truly are, just a reflection of their internal struggles. Once you accept that you can't control other people's actions, you begin to free yourself from the emotional burden of trying to change them. Instead of spending your energy on wishing people would act differently, you can focus on controlling your own responses. When you stop relying on others to dictate how you feel, you start to experience a level of emotional freedom that can be incredibly empowering. Taking control of your emotional responses isn't always easy, and it's something that requires practice. But the more you consciously choose how you react to others, the easier it becomes. You begin to see that you don't need to be at the mercy of other people's behavior. Instead, you can find peace and stability within yourself, regardless of what's happening around you. The more you practice taking responsibility for your own emotions, the more you'll begin to see that the power to stay calm, peaceful, and unshaken lies within you, not in the actions of others. The next time someone does something that would typically upset you, pause for a moment and realize that you can choose to respond differently. You have the power to control your own emotional state, and once you embrace that power, it becomes much harder for anything or anyone to truly bother you. Often, we find ourselves pointing fingers at others for how we feel. It's easy to blame someone else for our anger, frustration, or sadness. A colleague might take credit for your idea, and you feel hurt. A friend might cancel plans and you feel disrespected. In these moments, it's natural to want to assign blame. But what if, instead of focusing on the person who hurt you, you shifted your attention inward? What if, instead of looking at the actions of others, you asked yourself how you could grow from the experience? When we focus on blaming others, we give away our power. We put ourselves in a position where we feel helpless, because we're waiting for someone else to change in order for us to feel better. But this keeps us stuck in a cycle of frustration. The more we blame others, the more we let their behavior dictate our emotional state. In reality, the only person who can change your experience is you. When you shift your mindset from blame to growth, something incredible happens. You begin to see that every challenge or difficult situation is an opportunity for personal development. Instead of holding on to anger or resentment, you start asking, what can I learn from this? By reframing the situation, you take control over your emotions and turn negative experiences into positive opportunities for growth. Shifting away from blame also helps you develop greater emotional intelligence. The more you stop externalizing your emotions and start focusing on your own response, the better you understand your own triggers, patterns, and weaknesses. You begin to see that your emotions are not just reactions to what others do, they are reflections of your beliefs, values, and past experiences. When you stop blaming others, you start uncovering the underlying reasons for your emotional reactions. This self-awareness is crucial for emotional growth. When you realize that your emotions are rooted in your perceptions and interpretations, you can begin to change the way you view the world. For example, if you often feel hurt by others' criticism, it might be because you value approval or fear rejection. Once you understand this, you can work on building your self-esteem and learning to value yourself independent of others' opinions. Letting go of blame also leads to healthier, more empowering relationships. When you stop blaming others, you stop holding them to impossible standards. You start to accept people for who they are, flaws and all. This doesn't mean you tolerate mistreatment, but it does mean that you stop expecting others to be perfect in order for you to feel good about yourself. You can set boundaries without resentment and respond with compassion instead of judgment. As you practice shifting from blame to growth, you'll find that your emotional responses become more balanced and less reactive. You begin to see that no one has the power to make you angry or upset unless you allow them to. The more you focus on growth, the less you'll be bothered by external circumstances. Instead of letting others determine your emotional state, you become the architect of your own experience. You realize that the power to change how you feel has always been within you. We all have this deep-seated need to be right. It's a part of our nature, an instinct to defend our beliefs, our actions, and our perspectives. In arguments, discussions, or even in everyday interactions, we often find ourselves grasping at the need to be right. It feels almost like a personal victory when we can prove that we were correct. But what happens when being right becomes more important than maintaining our peace? What happens when the constant pursuit of being right drives us to frustration, resentment, or even anger? The need to be right can be incredibly exhausting. It's like running a race where the finish line is always moving further away. The more you try to prove your point, the more you end up getting caught in a cycle of conflict. You might win the argument, but at what cost? In the heat of insisting on your correctness, you might end up damaging relationships, creating unnecessary tension, or even losing sight of what truly matters in the moment. The need to be right is often a form of ego-driven defensiveness. When we feel threatened, We go into protection mode. We argue to safeguard our sense of self as if being wrong would make us lesser or less worthy. But here's the irony. In clinging to being right, we often miss the opportunity to learn or grow. If we're constantly focused on defending our point of view, we stop listening. We stop being open to the perspectives of others. Growth and learning happen in the moments when we allow ourselves to question our own beliefs, to be open to new ideas, and to realize that we don't have to have all the answers. Letting go of the need to be right doesn't mean abandoning your values or beliefs. It simply means being willing to step back and consider other viewpoints. It's about recognizing that there are many paths to understanding, and just because someone else sees things differently doesn't mean you're wrong. It's an acknowledgement that there is room for diversity of thought and that the need to be right doesn't serve the greater good. By giving up the need to be right, you free yourself from the weight of constant conflict. Instead of arguing to win, you start listening to understand. You start engaging in conversations not to prove a point, but to exchange ideas. This shift is incredibly liberating. It allows for deeper, more meaningful connections because you're no longer engaging from a place of defensiveness. You're engaging from a place of curiosity and openness. Ultimately, the need to be right keeps you stuck. It keeps you in a state of constant defense and conflict. But when you release it, you unlock the ability to move through the world with grace and ease. You become more open, more receptive, and more at peace with yourself and others. The pursuit of being right fades, and what remains is the pursuit of understanding and growth. Mindfulness is often described as the practice of being present in the moment, but it goes beyond just being aware of your surroundings. It's about cultivating a deep sense of awareness of your thoughts, emotions, and reactions in real time. In today's world, where distractions are endless and the pace of life often feels overwhelming, mindfulness offers a refuge. It gives us the ability to step out of the chaos and find a space of calm within ourselves. This space allows us to detach from the emotional storms we often get caught in. This is the power of mindfulness. It allows you to create a buffer between the external situation and your emotional reaction. When you are mindful, you are less likely to get swept up in the moment and more likely to respond in a way that aligns with your values and goals. For example, if someone cuts you off in traffic, your initial reaction might be anger or irritation. But with mindfulness, you can recognize this emotion as it arises and choose not to let it escalate. Instead of getting angry, you might simply acknowledge the situation. That's frustrating, but I can let it go. This simple shift in perception is often all it takes to break the cycle of negative emotions. In practice, mindfulness encourages you to approach life with curiosity rather than judgment. When you're curious about your emotions, you take the time to understand why they arise and what triggers them. You begin to see your reactions not as fixed or inevitable, but as patterns that can be changed. Over time, this awareness leads to greater emotional resilience. You learn to bounce back from setbacks, challenges, and difficult emotions more quickly because you no longer get trapped in them. Mindfulness also teaches you to embrace the present moment. When you are caught up in the past or worrying about the future, it's easy to become anxious, stressed, or upset. But mindfulness encourages you to focus on the now, on the sensations, thoughts, and emotions you're experiencing in the moment. This helps you stay grounded, even when life feels chaotic. By focusing on the present, you let go of the stories you tell yourself about what should have happened or what could happen. You stop living in the realm of what's out of your control and instead focus on what's right in front of you. Ultimately, mindfulness is a powerful tool for emotional regulation. It gives you the ability to observe your emotions without being consumed by them. It helps you step out of reactive patterns and into a space of thoughtful response. The more you practice mindfulness, the more you'll find that you are able to navigate life's challenges with a sense of calm and clarity, regardless of what's happening around you.